Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about public order / control in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and why it's such a pointless, irrelevant, and honestly bad mechanic that Creative Assembly has in the game. Now to be clear, I don't think control in itself is an issue, I think the way they handle it certainly is, especially on high difficulty levels. For instance, this is a campaign on Legendary, and on Legendary, because of the difficulty level, we have a -8 level of public order / control. Let's talk a bit about the history of this, and I'll also mention why this whole downside is really irrelevant in a lot of ways. This was introduced in Rome 2 with a patch. I believe it wasn't there initially in Rome 2, but when they were quote-unquote fixing Rome 2, they introduced this to make things harder, if you will. It's not even across the game, it's only something on a higher difficulty. And it is meaningless in a lot of ways, or even beneficial in some ways, though it can hurt certain races more than others. See, this is the thing to talk about. This certainly will hurt certain races, but for most races in the game, like 90% of the races in the game, this difficulty level penalty is not going to mean much at all. It's not something you're going to have to worry about in a campaign. It's not something you're going to build structures for to deal with. It may be something you're using a commandment for, but that's just because other commandments are not necessarily worth it. Though in the case of the dwarves over here, I certainly wouldn't use Venerate the Ancestors when I can get plus 25 growth through empowering the guilds, 10% construction, and 5% tradable resources. Absolutely not worth using Venerating the Ancestors unless I have a corruption issue. And I just want to eliminate it, though given the way corruption works in the game right now, very rarely are you going to encounter a situation where you have to deal with this. So, let's go over this. -8 public order, -4 from collected income from taxes, and -3 from provincial instability. But all of that is pretty pointless, because the provincial instability is going to go away in 3 turns. So that's just going to leave -12 control. But here's the thing. As you go to a lower and lower control level, specifically all the way to weak, your control in a province is actually going to go up. So the weak level control benefit you get will counteract the difficulty level penalty that you get in the game. So suddenly you're left at only -4 control. But you can also counteract that pretty easily, pretty passively, either through research that you would get underway, or in the case of the dwarves. So to be clear, the dwarves don't have the best control situation in the game. For the dwarves, you get +3 if you lower your grudges enough, or +2 in this case. And there's also research that you want to get as the dwarves, specifically the High King Authority. Though the main reason you're getting the High King Authority is not for the control benefit, you're mainly getting it for the diplomatic relations with other dwarven factions, so you can confederate them easier, get diplomatic dealings easier, have allies that you can help you out, because dwarven allies, especially on legendary difficulty, are really good because of the way that that legendary works and the way the dwarves work. The dwarves in particular benefit from, the dwarven AI benefits a great deal from the huge amount of growth, upkeep, casualty replenishment that legendary difficulty provides it. So dwarven allies, even minor factions, are really worth having in a campaign. So I'm not going to research this for a control level. And also, really, the main reason I'm researching this isn't even diplomatic relations. It's because I'm going for autonomy of the holds, and hey, Oaths Loyalty and High King Authority are pretty close to it. Or at least Oaths Loyalty. High King Authority might not even be worth picking up. And I don't want autonomy of the holds for the growth. But see, here's the thing. Many races wouldn't care at all about any particular downside from a weak level of control. And furthermore, having a weak level of control, actually sparking a rebellion, is in your interest in a lot of campaigns. It was in your interest in Warhammer 1 and in Warhammer 2. I'm sure some of you that played Warhammer 1 and 2 remember the meta of deliberately sparking rebellions so you can farm them for money, experience, and, say, influence or faction resources. For the dwarves, it would be oath gold. For the elves, it would be influence, and so on. So actually sparking a rebellion is not necessarily a downside. Besides, a rebellion gives you a temporary level of control. And as I stated, most races are not going to conserve control in any way, in any significant way, because they have very easy ways of counteracting poor levels of control. Chaos has chaos corruption, as an example. I mean, the chaos dwarves, don't get me wrong, the chaos dwarves may suffer from a low level of control, but not because they would spark a rebellion, but because it's increasing their labor losses. But even then, they do have a commandment that they can use, and they might want to use it. Though more and more, as I play a Chaos Dwarf campaign, I come to the conclusion that using that most of the time is not worth it, because me getting more conclave influence faster or money is probably worth it. Unless I'm really pushing my laborers to the brink, then I might just want to chill out and get 10 control for quite a few turns there in a particular province. But outside of that particular context, generally I'm not really worried with control. In any race, I'm not worried if I'm playing Bretonnia. I'm not worried if I'm playing High Elves, unless I want to get my control level to 100, and then yeah, I build a bunch of control buildings. Though I'm also building control buildings because they generate income. A lot of controlled buildings have some kind of secondary effect. For instance, for dwarves, you may get Gotrek and Felix to appear in this region. Also, you're generating dwarf beer keg production, which is a tradable resource that can give you money through trading partners. The dwarves do have scalability in trade. But here's the downside. For certain races, specific races that already aren't necessarily the strongest, what is the real downside of the control penalty? It's not that you'll have rebellions, it's not that you're going to lose control of a province, because, hey, you can see a rebellion coming, you can build a couple of units, you can deal with a rebellion very, very easily. No problem. And you know the rebellion will always start at your provincial capital. If you don't control an entire province, and if you don't control the provincial capital specifically, it will spark at the first minor settlement that you captured in that province. So say for instance over here, if I were to get a rebellion right now into Dead Rock Gap, it would spawn at the high place, even if I control the World Edge Archway. Assuming I didn't control Mount Gunbad, in which case it would spawn there. But here's the issue for certain races, and this is where the imbalance gets created. For certain races, the secondary effect is pretty substantial in a negative way. So for instance, dwarves get minus 20 growth if they have a weak level of control. And you're always going to have a low level of control, and it's not worth investing in having a high level of control, especially early on in a campaign, because you've got other things to worry about. You've got other commandments to use. Like, it's much more beneficial to get Empower the Guilds, because that's more than making up for whatever issues of growth I might have there, but it's certainly going to slow down my campaign for this weak level of growth. But I don't have the money or the building structures to invest right now in control. Like, I'll just get more money if I get the Trinket Maker, as an example, in this particular campaign. It's just the smarter decision at this point. Sure, eventually I will get refactories, but not right now. I also know that I won't face a rebellion in this particular province. Ever. Unless an army marches into this province, but I won't face it because, well, the capital of Karazakarak is generating 2 control. The grudges I have are generating, the grudge severity I have is generating 2 control, so that's counteracting the tax effect. And if I get to a weak level of control, that's going to counteract the difficulty level penalty. But the minus 20 growth that I have over here certainly is an impact, but only for certain races. Other races don't care, but why do the dwarves? Well, because the dwarves have an abysmal level of growth. They are one of the weakest races in the entire game, and they're one of the weakest races because of the low level of growth. To give you an idea, Bretonnia gets such a high level of growth, they beat the Greenskins in passive level of growth, even if you count the WoW. Like a tier 3 settlement, minor settlement for Bretonia might generate 60 growth. That is pretty absurd. For the dwarves, a tier 1 settlement generates 5. A tier 2, 7. Tier 3, 10. So over here, for instance, this one, so over here from these two, I'm generating just 10 growth. And from the capital, I'm generating 20. So that's 30. Most of it would be eliminated by the weak level of growth over here. Sure, I have the commandment of the guilds, I have the barley field, but it is going to significantly slow down my building ability in this particular province. It would be nice if Forgrim actually started with the tier 2 settlement. His campaign start would be a lot better. I mean, Skarsenik starts with the tier 2 settlement, and he's a pathetic weakling. It's not like the dwarves are a strong race at the moment. So the real issue isn't rebellion, or even the recruitment cost. It's just the growth for this specific race. For most other races, it is an irrelevancy. And even if you do get a rebellion, so what of it? A rebellion is free money, it's experience, it's faction resources. What's the downside in having a rebellion? Sure, you might pay more to recruit units. You might lose some of your line of sight, sure. And you're obviously going to miss out from the high level of control benefits that you may get, like in this case, a bit of a recruitment cost benefit and some growth benefit, sure. But it is just an irrelevant thing in most factions, most races. And even as the dwarves, you can certainly play the dwarves and make it work decently well. You're just going to have to rush. You're just going to have to use the Empower the Guild commandments in every province. And you're going to have to build a barley field. And if you do get to tier 2, you might just accept the cost of building a refractory as opposed to building a trinket maker in that particular province. But most of the time, if you're building a refractory, you've got plenty of trade agreements and you just want more. And the main reason to build it is actually for trade purposes, not for control purposes. Also to get Bugman's Rangers, let's not ignore that, from a tier 3 drinking hall. So the whole control penalty that we only have on Legendary is just really a bloody frustration, at most. That slows down your campaign, but doesn't really impose any real penalty. You don't care about it most of the time. You don't care if you're playing the Empire, the Vampire Counts. Some races, this is the thing. This is why this system is broken. If you're playing the Vampire Counts, do you ever care about control buildings? No. You might care about the buildings for other purposes, but you don't care about them for the sake of just control, because, well, vampiric corruption is going to generate a high level of control in your provinces. As the Greenskins, you get so much control passively that you never have to care about it. As Kislev, yes, as Kislev, it never really is much of an issue. As the Empire, might be an issue, but, well, the building that increases control also allows you to recruit witch hunters, which, guess what, you do want. And you may also want Gotrek and Felix. As Bretonia, you get such an absurd level of control passively as Bretonia that you really never give a damn. As the High Elves, do you care about control? Well, yes and no. You do care about reaching 100 control, sure. But the control building is also an economic building that you want to build either way because, well, you do obviously have the Elven Artisan, but why not pair it with the control building that also will generate some income and get a bunch of these two together and then get to 100 control and significantly boost your income. The penalty itself is not going to stop you in that respect. It's just going to slow you down a bit, but it's not going to stop you. Lizardmen, not really an issue. Dark Elves, you might think Dark Elves, right? You get a significant number of penalties because of the slaves. Sure, you're going to build a bunch of controlled buildings as the Dark Elves, mainly to deal with the slave situation. If it wasn't for the slaves imposing such a significant penalty, you would never really bother with it as the Dark Elves either. Wood Elves? No, not at all. Skaven? Let's talk about Skaven. Skaven are the only race that actually consistently face rebellions when you're playing them. But that's because when Skaven take over a settlement, a province, they're looting and occupying it. And looting and occupying it costs minus 40 in terms of control in a particular province. It's temporary, it only lasts 1 turn, but it is obviously imposing a significant control penalty in the provinces they're taking over. And that's why they face rebellions. But what that really means for Skaven is that as soon as they finish taking over a province, next turn they're just going to get a rebellion, which is just free money, because, well, guess what? If you've just taken over a province, it means you have an entire army in that particular province that is ready to go, ready to deal with the army that just spawned, so free food for the Skaven, effectively. And on and on and on. Only a handful of factions, like the dwarves, the poor, miserable dwarves, actually have an issue with it. And it's not an issue of rebellions, it's an issue of growth. In fact, if you got rebellions as the dwarves, that might be beneficial because it would give you the money you so desperately need in a campaign. And furthermore, if you got the rebellion as the dwarves, you can actually make up for the poor growth and control in a province that you have by drinking to victory. Yes, you can actually cheese rebellions even still in the game. So for instance, if I were to get a rebellion here, that would be a great thing. If I'm not getting a rebellion, then yeah, just slowing down my growth, but I will eventually grow as long as I have enough structures, as long as I can get a commandment in a province. So it's an annoying mechanic. It never made sense, even in Rome 2. It was always a level of frustration. And it's something that I think Creative Assembly should completely eliminate from the game. That's my perspective on it. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications.